All right, everyone, welcome back to the Alpha Girl Soccer Podcast. My guest today is the host of the On The Touchline Podcast, youth soccer and high school soccer coach, and all-around amazing human being and advocate for soccer, Coach Jason Broadwater. Jason, how are things going for you over in Pittsburgh today?
Yeah, doing great, Shay, and thank you so much for having me on the show. As I told you in our warm-up, that I just absolutely love what you're doing and what Alpha Girls Soccer stands for, and is the dad of two little girls that, trying to raise strong, independent females, and that's what it's all about, in my book. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm excited to have you on because I had a lot of fun on your podcast back in April, I believe it was. So that was really fun. And then, like I said, you've been a huge advocate, and I think that what you're doing over in Pittsburgh is amazing. I'm excited to have you on today, and we're going to talk a little bit about, a lot of it about, how parents can improve their youth players' experience and also coaches and stuff like that. But before we get into that, if you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about you and why you're so passionate about this beautiful game.
Yeah, so I often tell my players, and my wife, if she were here, she could vouch for this, that it's the best sport in the world, period, the end. And when people have a chance to experience it and to see the glory and the passion and the what this sport can provide for us as coaches and as players and even as parents, you'll realize that every other sport out there it doesn't hold a candle to football or to soccer. So a little bit about me. So I did not have an extensive playing career. I played as a youth player, was a travel/rec player. Actually left the game of soccer / football for a really long time. And it wasn't until I was in college that I was helping with our men's team at the college I was at. And I was around it, but I wasn't really, I wasn't involved in playing or whatever, and was learning the game and paying attention to it. Always liked it, thought it was a really great sport to be around, but, never sort of found my way in. And it wasn't actually until, my son was born over 9 years ago. And when he started playing soccer back in 2014, that I thought that there could be an opportunity. Had played a number of sports growing up, very American in my background of sports I played, from soccer to baseball to basketball, American football, golf, and probably everything in between. And, had always thought in the back of my mind that being a coach would be something that would be interesting to me. I love sports. I love the competition. I love the preparation. I love what goes into making an athlete. And one of the people that genuinely believe that life lessons can be taught through sport. And in this particular case, through football, through soccer. So use those terms sort of interchangeably if people are wondering why I keep calling. Yeah. To me, it should be called football, but
yeah,
hey, that's just
I agree.
But anyway, realizing that, sport can be just a great vehicle for kids. It was a great vehicle for me, really helped shape, I think, sort of, some of the determination and grittiness that I have just as a human being. And, that ability to push through tough times in life. Have had some really tough personal circumstances at different times in my life. And, if it wasn't for sport, I actually don't know if I would have been able to get through, those times. And luckily I have a great support system in my family and my wife, and, very openly talk about working with a psychotherapist at different times in my life. It's all these things sort of together that have made me into who I am, not only as a person, but as a coach. And I think, like I said, that football or soccer can be that mechanism for a young person to go on to that next level, right? As a successful business owner, or to be a doctor, or a dentist, or a lawyer, or, work in marketing, or work at a bank, or whatever they decide to do as their professional path. That drive to want to be excellent, I think it can be accomplished, through sport. So have coached everything from, the tiny kickers of the, the little kids, the preschool age kids, all the way to high school kids, have aspirations of working in the college game someday. And people say, what do you do for fun? I coach soccer and I watch soccer. And my 3-year-old daughter likes to joke with me that she just refers to me as a silly little coach. So she's probably right.
That's cute. So although I'm not a parent, obviously, I don't know if I ever will be one, but I am super passionate about because when I go to games, the thing I hate the most and the thing that makes me the most frustrated and sad and angry is when kids are playing their game and parents are screaming at the top of their lungs. And you can tell the kids are just hanging their heads when their parents do that. And as a player, for most of my club career, my dad was really, really hard on me on the field and after games and stuff like that. So for you as a former player and now a parent and a coach, how have you seen, if any changes, have you seen with parent behavior on the sidelines affecting players? Has it gotten worse, do you think? Has it stayed the same? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I feel like when I write my book about my life in football or soccer, that this is definitely a full chapter for sure. And I would call it the good, the bad, the ugly. And a lot of it starts, so I was writing down some notes of kind of related to this topic. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think it's really broken down to 3 different things. So there is the pre-match or pre-training ride to, that session or that match. What is actually discussed, in the car, sort of what are the expectations of the family, the parent, how's the player feeling, that sort of thing.
Yeah. There's
the match itself, of, what goes on during a match or a training session, how involved a parent is or isn't. And then there's the ride home. And in some cases, I would say the dreaded ride home, because I can completely relate to, maybe I didn't have my best game, right? And that ride home was God, I get it. You don't have to remind me that I played poorly. I'm smart enough to know that I didn't put my best effort out there today.
Yeah.
So what I would compare it to is, sort of the ride to a training session or match is sort of like priming, to get ready to put paint on a wall or to use a lawnmower or something like that, where you're sort of setting the tone for what that expectation is for the player. So I think there's a make or break point there in terms of, are you building them up or are you already starting to tear them down? And I think our role as parents, and as those connected to players, I think really our job is to build players up, right? We want them to get out of the car. We want them to feel confident and strong about sort of their mental side, and, go and do what they do. And if they don't, meet those expectations they've set for themselves or, that they have for us as parents or whatever, it's okay. It's then figuring out how do you, have that conversation with your player, when that time comes. And when a training session or match is actually going on, so imagine that, you and I are sitting for our SATs or ACTs. We literally have somebody over our shoulder going, hey, Shay, do this, pick this one, pick C. Hey, Jason, no, you messed up there. No, what are you doing? Come on, stop. Right?
Yeah,
we've all
absolutely.
seen it, and it drives me absolutely, batty. Now as a parent, because I can just show up and watch my son play. I literally sit on my hands and say almost nothing during a match, and that's been amazing because he has truly thrived as a player because there isn't this pressure from dad or from mom, for him to perform as if he's in the circus or something like that, right? So go out and perform and put on a great show, entertain us,
right?
That sort of thing. So players are engaged in active learning when they're on a field or on a pitch, in a training session or whatever. So again, to use the SAT, ACT, test model or whatever, that it's incredibly distracting that if someone is trying to, look over your shoulder, poke you in the arm, whisper in your ear, hey, here's what you should do. Let them figure it out. Let them fail. Let them make mistakes. Let them, kind of navigate their own path. We're actually better as parents, as family members, when they can do that. And the players are better off in the long run, because of that. And I think, this is a bit of a generalization here, but I would say, it's probably true that we as parents have to be secure and comfortable with who we are first, and to not project that onto our children. When we do that, we're trying to live vicariously through them, right? It's their life.
Yeah.
Our playing career, our playing days are behind us. I coach a separate team from my son's team. I'm not trying to dump that on him just because I want him to perform, a certain way. So I would recommend to any parent, to any family member, to actually hit the pause button, right? And if you feel yourself getting elevated, if you feel yourself sort of getting into the passion of a match, and let's face it, I mean, football and soccer is an incredibly passionate sport, and especially if you're in a really tight match and your team comes back and they score a incredible goal, and just the emotion you feel, not only as a player, as a coach, but as a parent. I mean, it's real. It's apparent. I mean, you can't deny that.
Yeah.
But also knowing that, there's boundaries, and knowing kind of what the role of a parent is. So, that all factors in. And then last but not least, is the ride home of if a player had a great game, if a player had a bad game. I actually try and, give a little bit of a buffer, especially in my situation with my son, to even really talk about the match. If there's things that he did well, I'll immediately tell him, hey, man, you had a great turn there, or, I love that you had your head up and you made a great pass. You guys were, you were building toward to score a goal, but for whatever reason, it may or may not have worked out. It seems like you're getting more comfortable playing out of the back. It's great to see that. I love how you're working with your teammates. You're a great teammate when you weren't on the field because you were supporting. I saw you cheering on your teammates. And look for those positive things. I don't spend much time, in terms of the negative right after a match.
For sure.
I usually try and wait actually 24 hours. And, if we have a recap about a match or whatever, I ask my son, what did you see? What did you feel? How do you feel that the match went, for you as a player? What could you do differently next time? And I just listen. I don't really interject, much feedback. I just listen. And, sometimes he's forthcoming with information. Sometimes I have to lead him a little bit more in terms of my own observations, but I want him to sort of discover it. And that's all sort of part of the mix, I guess you could say. The last thing I'll say about this particular topic, so it varies from club to club, situation to situation, right? Some clubs are incredibly explicit when it comes to parent behavior.
Yeah.
Some do an excellent job of educating parents of, here is your role. Here's why it looks a little bit different when it comes to football or soccer versus, basketball or baseball or American football or, any other youth sport out there. But here are what our expectations are. So when your son or daughter steps onto the pitch, not only are they representing themselves and your family, but they're representing our club. So we always want to put our best foot forward. And that, any opportunity, I mean, that's preseason meetings, that's in-season meetings, that's email communication. Some parents are quick learners when it comes to this topic and sort of, take their cues from the club. Other parents like to sort of test their boundaries, much like children do, in terms of figuring out, well, how far can I actually go before someone sort of says, hey, you probably need to reel it in just a little bit. So, so it's a lot of different things there. And, I would be happy that, whenever we finish up the podcast, that if anyone, any parent, any player or whatever is, encountered in a situation where they're really just not sure how to navigate it. I can't promise that I have an answer to every scenario, but I would certainly be willing to listen because every situation's, certainly unique, but I definitely feel like I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to this particular topic. And that when it's good, it can be really, really good. And a kid can feel empowered. A kid can feel confident. A kid can feel, like they're growing not only as a player, but as a person. in that I think what they're looking for are champions. I think they're looking for cheerleaders. I think they're looking for people who they can go to and support them. And I had a player when I was coaching some of the younger kids in a previous life, literally during the middle of a match, I pulled him off, subbed on another kid, and I asked him, I said, what's going on? I said, you don't seem like yourself today. And he literally started to break down in tears in the middle of a match. Now, mind you, he's playing really, really well. But the constant chirping from his parents, it was relentless. And I told him, I said, the only voice that you need to hear out there is mine or, my coaching partner. I said,
Right.
you are playing a great match. I'm incredibly proud of you. Don't worry, tune everything out. Now, for a U10 player, easier said than done, right? And it reminds me of sort of kind of like my own, I don't know if I've ever been diagnosed with ADHD, but I feel like I have it some days where I'm like, look, a bird, look over there,
Right.
That's exactly what's going on for a kid in terms of hearing literally 9,000 different voices. And I'm trying to explain something maybe technical or tactical during a match. And, their head's in the clouds and they're not paying attention to anything that I'm saying. So yeah, like I said, I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. I hope that we continue to evolve and, get better in this area, not only as parents, but as family members, as clubs. We as a collective, soccer, football society here in the States, that I think we can continue to do better, for sure.
Yeah. And I actually want to go back to when you were talking about, like the culture of a club. Like some clubs have the culture of having the parents have certain expectations. And I've been going to a lot of games lately, fall season, watching my players play. And some of my players play on rec leagues and some are competition. And the thing that I've noticed, rec versus middle, low level competition versus higher level competition, is the rec levels, the parents are the craziest. They're the most chatty. They're coaching from the sidelines. They're yelling from the sidelines. They're talking to their kids when they come off and get subbed. And then on the middle level competition, it's more of just like coaching from the sidelines, yelling from the sidelines. They're not like talking to their kid when they come off. And then you go from there to the higher level competition and the sidelines are nearly silent. It's like there's a few like, yeah, good job cheering, but it's absolutely like nothing like those other two organizations. So it's just interesting that I think the culture is such a huge part of it. And so if someone's listening to this that has any type of leadership within the club or even a team manager or something, just creating that culture of like, hey, this is their game. We're not here to coach them. We're here to, support them and encourage them. So I think that was a really good point that you brought up that I wanted to hit home a little bit.
I've had an identical experience, from rec all the way up to high school and club and everything in between, travel soccer as well. That it does seem that the higher you go, in terms of maybe the competition, that not in every situation, but in most situations, the parent behavior seems to be a little more, I guess I would use the word nuanced in terms of them understanding some of the details of the game a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I would say, I've never been a director of coaching, but, that would be a position that would be really interesting to me because I think at a club, there's a massive opportunity or a manager, as part of a team to educate and to help explain. And I think, for the most part, what it comes down to is people just not knowing, and that's absolutely okay. Soccer isn't necessarily as much in our DNA as a society as it is in, say, a European or a South American country. But we can educate and become better because of it. And sort of, what should you look for, right? If you're watching a game and it's a U10 match, what could you expect maybe from your son or daughter? What would be, 3 or 4 things that you could be really proud of? And so, it made me think of a quick story that my wife was actually at one of our matches recently, and she goes, wow, she goes, the opposing fans, she goes, they just kept yelling, boot it and clear it and get rid of it and all
Yeah.
these things. And, this was a high school match. And she goes, and she said to me, she goes, I know you talk about these things a lot, and one, just how much they annoy me.
Yeah.
They certainly do,
Right.
but again, massive opportunity to educate. And I think, for us as a coach, an administrator, however we're involved in the game, it doesn't really matter what the title is. I think football and soccer is about educating, those around us. That's how we become better as a society. That's how we look for the
Mhm.
nuances. That's how we, one of the first things that I've told my players when we even look at film, don't look at where the ball is. Look at what's happening away from the ball.
Yeah.
And then you see the game completely differently. And as a quick aside, that's why it's really hard to watch any match and not go into coach mode, almost immediately, because I'm not watching things that other people are watching. And that's just sort of how I've become wired. So it's kind of hard to watch a match now strictly for just pleasure or enjoyment, even
Yeah.
though, Everton gives me enough heartache and enough heartburn for a lifetime. So anyway.
Yeah. So going back, because you made a point earlier that a lot of people might have missed when we were talking about the dreaded ride home, and that was that number one, you usually like give it 24 hours, right? Because I've learned, like, I would say, I don't know, I could be wrong on this, but maybe like 80% of the time, 80% of players don't want to talk about the game after they play. Like, most of them just want to go eat their Chick-fil-A, go have fun with their friends, whatever. And there are some players that do want to talk about the game and break it down. But the thing you said that really stuck with me that I think is super important is that you listen. You don't just talk, but you actually listen. You let your son or your daughter kind of go through the game and you just listen, because it also helps them to learn when they're kind of evaluating their self.
hmm Well, absolutely. And if someone has any opportunity to continue to advance, right? So goal number one for me as a coach, that if I'm coaching young players, is that they come back and continue to play the game. Never want players to walk away. And so, yeah, there's circumstances out of my control. That
Mm-hmm.
being, the ride home, right? Can't be a part of that. Um, so I agree. I mean, a 24-hour rule. I mean, I think part of it is just gauging the temperature of the room. And what
Right.
I mean by that is to see sort of the body language your son or daughter has when they walk off the pitch. If they're sort of beaming and maybe they scored a goal or two, or maybe they had a really great assist, or, just played an overall great match or whatever, they might be a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
inclined to talk about it. But if there's,
Absolutely.
shoulders are sort of slumped down and, they're kind of sulking a little bit, or whatever, it might not be the time to sort of dive into that topic. And,
Mm.
typically, at least I speak for my son here, after a match, I mean, he's literally like a wild animal that hasn't had food in like months. So
That's how
he
I
doesn't
am
want to
too.
talk. He doesn't want to talk about the match. He wants Chick-fil-A or something else. So and I don't blame him. You just put in a good body of work. You're physically tired. Like, the last thing you want to do is like go through some like analysis session with dad. Um, so
Yeah.
I think it's about me just recognizing, like I said, sort of the temperature of the room of when a good time to have that conversation is. And it just comes down to knowing your kids, your family, kids that you're around, whatever. I mean, typically after a match, I mean, our ride home, I mean, like, we'll put music on. My son's really into music. Like, that's one of the ways he, de-stresses. We typically stop if time allows, and get something to eat. So it's about, I mean, then it goes into family time, pretty quickly. And then
Right.
we can talk about the match and stuff later on.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, even after a win for me as a coach, I, I don't, I don't always immediately want to talk about the match, right? I mean, I get why there's a cooling off period, and I admire any professional manager, um, working in a coaching setting where they then have to go on camera and get interviewed or whatever. I understand why, coaches lose their mind sometimes, because I'm annoyed. win or loss, win or lose after a match sometimes, even if we won and we didn't play that well, I'm like, man, we could have done these things better. I don't really want to talk about it, right? I don't want to go into like an in-depth analysis because I'll just get wound up and, kind of do something I regret or yell at somebody that I don't want to yell at or, something like that.
Absolutely. So along with like the whole parent thing, coaching from the sidelines, so a lot of parents, I guess rec leagues is where I'm going with this, is a lot of the coaches that are coaching for rec leagues are parent volunteers. Even some clubs, right? They'll have parent volunteers or just volunteers in general. So this drives me crazy when I'm training and maybe there's like a rec team training across from me. And I know it's not the coach's fault, but it drives me nuts. And that's like, they will literally just like set the balls up and just see who can kick it the farthest. And like, that's their practice. Like they're not working on technical skills. They're not working on the basics. And I know, like I said, that's not the coach's fault. It's just like, I think our education system, I think we need to make it more accessible to those parent coaches and just they need to know the basics of how to coach a team. What should they be working on? Stuff like that. So like, what would you say for parent coaches or volunteer coaches that don't really have a lot of experience? What advice would you give them for how they can maybe learn more about the game or how to structure a training session and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I was that person early on in my career. I was that volunteer parent, coach, and thought, hey, perhaps I could add some value here to this team at the time. So for any parent that's been there or is in that situation, I certainly can relate. I guess golden rule, at least for me, players should always have a ball at their feet, right? Not just kicking the ball away, not just, chasing it or seeing how far they can boot it or whatever, but actually doing something with the ball at their feet. And so Tom Byer, he has a book that he wrote, that soccer starts at home. So for a player to develop their confidence, a player to evolve as a player, in terms of the tactics of the game, it really starts with having a strong foundation of technical ability. That means loving the soccer ball, right? Being able to do different turns, being able to feel confident with the ball at your feet, being able to, take players on in a 1v1 situation where you just don't panic and have a meltdown like we've all seen players do. So there are incredible resources out there, right now. Completely agree. Coaching education at all levels, from the lowest level license all the way to the highest. They need to be more affordable, and they need to be open that parents, especially if it's a parent volunteer who's just giving a few hours or whatever, they need to be able to access some of those resources. So I do think there's an educational component to it as well. I also think that, for any parent in that situation, it's like anything in life, right? If you put zero effort into, your diet or exercise or your 9-to-5 job or whatever, you're probably not going to get much out of it, right? But if you plan, you kind of think through, okay, well, I'm not a U8 player, but what developmentally would be good for them to maybe learn at this age? And we're not talking about like working on throw-ins, but like actually having a ball at their feet, right? Or seeing how far we can kick a goal kick or something like that. Like, come on, let's drill down a little bit more. So for any parent, watch as much as you can in terms of soccer. Follow a team, pick a team in the Premier League, pick an NWSL team, it doesn't matter. There's enough quality football being played right now that you can find something to pay attention to. Does it have to look like it looks in 11v11? Absolutely not. If you're coaching a U8 or a U10 team, but how did they get to that point? So what are they doing in training that those players are that confident, with the ball at their feet? So for me, a lot of it, dribbling, passing, being able to receive a ball, with the correct foot, how to make a proper pass, communication with teammates, all those little things. And then what I would say, if I'm the coach of that team, I'm inviting the parents in either before a training session or after a training session or after a match or whatever. And I say to them, okay, here's what we worked on this week. Now I want you to work on these three things, because I'm only going to see you maybe one time or two times this,
Right.
in the next week. So I want you to work on these on the days we're not together. And if you can, have a soccer ball virtually in every room of your house, because as I found, so I have I have three kids, and my 1-year-old, she's going to be 13 months here in a few days. She literally, if there's a ball in the room, Shay, she will find the ball and she will start kicking it. It wasn't because I told her, it wasn't because I said, hey, Hope, go find that soccer ball and start kicking it, right? She found it on her own and started kicking it. So again, for us, I completely subscribe to this idea that, football or soccer has to start at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I get, I'm painting probably an idealistic, picture here, that every situation and every family situation is great and blah, 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 blah. Soccer balls aren't that expensive. A kid can have a soccer ball, and if a kid is really struggling to have one, let me know. I will send it to them. Seriously. And the awesome thing about our game, so, you want to get better at baseball or basketball or other sports. Yeah, there's things you can do without being on a field or having a basketball hoop or whatever. Literally, you need a surface and a soccer ball to get better. That's all you need, right? You don't need, I'm sure you get like 1,000 of these emails a week. I know I do, of like, hey, buy this product. This will help you with blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Great. But for me, and some people have said, like, my view of the game is probably simplistic. I don't think it needs to be complicated, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think for parents that, whether they played, whether they didn't play, whatever the case may be, there's a massive opportunity for parents to learn. And if you're invested in your kid, which I would assume, the majority of parents are, they love their kids unconditionally, you're going to do whatever it takes to support your kid, right? And if the kid loves that soccer ball, then do whatever it takes to help them continue to love that soccer ball. Don't be that barrier of entry, for them, where they go, well, mom or dad are making, they're not making it fun anymore, or, God, it's like, blah, it's really awful, or I don't want to go to soccer practice or whatever. Like, I've heard all the horror stories. I've lived some of the horror stories, and part of it is just my own self-awareness now. And I hope anyone listening to this doesn't misconstrue that I have it all figured out. I don't. We're a hot mess. So we jokingly call ourselves the Hot Mess Express at our house. We're a work in progress, but we've committed to the work, and as a family, of getting better and wanting to, support our kids and make sport a part of their life, and a lifelong activity for that matter.
Yeah, like it doesn't back to like dribbling the ball around the house. Like, and if there's any players listening to this as well, like you don't have to go out and do all these drills in your backyard or go to the park. Even just having a ball at your foot, like when you're walking around the house, dribbling it around, even if you're just watching TV, like sitting on the couch, like touching the ball. The more that players are around the ball, like they're literally forming a relationship with the ball and getting more comfortable with it at their feet. So I love that, like you said, like bring the parents in after practice and say, hey, this is what we worked on. Now, can you like kind of reinforce this at home?
Well, and I've gone as far as, in this sort of media, communications world and marketing world, it is nothing for a coach to record what they want their parents to do, right? So if they have no idea what a toe touch is, or a toe tap, or a pendulum or something like that, show them, right? Because I'm a visual learner. So if I'm telling you, hey, Shay, you've never played soccer before, and your parents really have never played soccer before, but I need you to do all these things. I need you to do an outside chop. And they say, what the hell is an outside chop? I've had a chopped salad, but I don't know what an outside chop is. So show them what that actually looks like. And I just think it's an easy excuse for coaches when they say, well, I don't know how to use iMovie, or I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do that. Learn, right? If you're invested in your players and you're giving your time, learn. Your job is to make them better. Even if you're getting paid, not getting paid, learn.
So. Yeah. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there's a U.S. soccer grassroots program. That's free, isn't it?
Yeah. So some of the entry level courses. So it's changed a little bit in the last few years. But they have different, you can do some of it online. You have to do, I think, 2 of the courses in person. The courses for those entry level, or the cost for those courses for the entry level things are actually not bad. We're talking like less than $100. So, again, not great, not free, but at least reasonable versus a few $1,000s when you get into a C license or, a B license or whatever. And, I'm looking at my C license next year, and, my wife and I have already had that conversation of, I'm going to have to go away for a week 2 times. I'm going to have to find lodging, meals. We're looking at a few $1,000s to do something that is going to add value for me as a coach. Not everyone's probably going to go to that level or higher or whatever. And that's absolutely fine. If they're working for their local community club and they want to help out, you can still learn a lot. And so this is where I disagree, I guess, with U.S. soccer in terms of sort of their methodology when it comes to play, practice, play. That might be effective in a rec environment. But if you're in something a little more competitive, I'll be quite honest, I tried to use something similar to that with some young players that I had at U10. They absolutely hated it. They actually were, when they were arriving for our training session to begin, and I told them just jump in and start playing. We'll start with 2v2s, 3v3s, 2v1s, whatever, depending on how many players they had. And literally they asked 1,000 questions of, you want me to do what? Coach, this isn't what we normally do. Why are we doing this? They got hung up on the details.
Yeah.
And, the fact of like, sort of this like street ball or, kind of like pickup culture or whatever. We've moved really, really far away from that. I think it's hard to move back to that. Not to say it's impossible, but I think play, practice, play is really served for that coach who, maybe is working in that rec environment and doesn't have much experience with the game. That at least gives them a template, a guiding force where their kids are actually touching a soccer ball versus, kicking the ball away or, God forbid, I've seen people, like I said, work on throw-ins, where I'm going, can I just run over there and fix this, please?
Yeah. So for those of you that may not know what the play, practice, play, what he means by that. So to put it simply, so you start with play. So when your players arrive, you do like a little small sided game. So 2v2, 3v3, the kids just go and play. And then from there you have your practice where, say, you're working on passing. So that's when you're having your more practice, organized part of it. And then the end is just, again, play. So kind of putting everything you learned into play, just kind of letting them play. So I think, yes, like you said, I think that's a great way for coaches that are newer or in that rec environment to just go in and, get the kids lots of touches on the ball right when they get there. So I like that. I've personally never used it because it's newer. And so I've never used it, but I think it could be a great way for coaches that are kind of looking for a little bit more direction and organization to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, and last thing I'll add, so the sort of the idealistic and sort of, perfect world scenario where, say my 9-year-old is like going out and playing pickup with a bunch of his friends, in the neighborhood. I just don't think that's going to happen in 2019 and going forward. No. Given, you look at any news site today or whatever, parents are incredibly, cautious and, overly protective of their children, as they should be. I'm probably a little overly protective of my 3. So I get that they're not just going to ship, little Susie or little Johnny out and say, go play at the park. It's cool. Like, come back when the street lights come on and it's starting to get dark. That's what I grew up with.
Same.
It was also a different time and it was a different era. So what I would say would be, take it one step further. It would be organized, yet it would be unstructured. So when I was working with a local club, an idea we had kicked around was basically like, we called it Free Play Fridays, where we would just say, we have this space from, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Anybody is welcome. Any travel player, any rec player, any parent, any, whatever, any coach. Kids show up, first 5 that show, okay, there's your team. Okay, next 5 that show, there's your team. You just start playing. The only role of the parent or the coaches that show up would be basically, to help keep things moving along, to make sure, no one's getting hurt, but no one's coaching, right? The kids are sort of making their rules, they're figuring it out. If someone's unhappy with their team and they want to go play with their friends and, hey, so-and-so's not passing me the ball, or this has been a rough experience or whatever. Okay, figure it out, work out the problem. We've kicked around things like that. I think something along those lines is probably a little more realistic in the world we live in versus saying like, yeah, go down to the local park, and just start playing,
Right.
I don't know,
Yeah, no, I think that's something that's missing from youth sports these days is just like unstructured play. Like you said, it doesn't have to be like go off on your own, but even just getting some friends together and just going to play, no coaching, just go out there and have fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, fun has to be
number one.
Number one, number two, on the list of why they're doing it. I mean, if it's not fun, they're not going to continue to do it.
Absolutely. All right. So as we bring this podcast to a close, where can people learn more about you, and also where can they check out your On The Touchline podcast? And if you want, actually give us a little spiel on what your podcast is all about as well.
Yeah. So if people listening to this have come to realize that sometimes I just don't know when to shut up. So that's probably why I got into podcasting. So available on all major podcasting platforms. And my podcast, so I talk to coaches, players, and influencers in the game of football or game of soccer. And, it's really to tell their story in terms of what they're doing, how they got to where they are. Sometimes we drill down on specific topics, in the game itself. But largely, talking to coaches and players and those that have sort of a bigger footprint, in the game to kind of learn from them and what their experience has been. So you can find me really active on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm at SoccerCoachJB. And yeah, would love to reach out to anyone listening to this, and feel free if you have questions or kind of hung up on something. I mean, I feel my role as a coach is to, one, not only make myself accessible, but, to just pay it forward and to be helpful and help players, parents, fellow coaches. I hope I don't come across as sort of a know-it-all, because I know I have a lot to learn, and as I continue to evolve as a coach. And, it's funny how I looked at the game 5 years ago and how I look at the game now are dramatically different. And just how I've evolved as a coach and as a person, and really, have landed on a philosophy and a style, and can very quickly articulate that to someone if they say, well, like, what are you trying to do as a coach? I can tell a parent that pretty quickly now. Whereas before, I think I was really struggling, to do that. So, but yeah, Shay, I loved having you on my show, and you're welcome back anytime. And this has certainly been a whole lot of fun for sure.
Yeah. And thank you again so much for coming on. And you are like a big reason why, like, you're the first person I reached out to get advice on how to do these interview style podcasts. And I think so far they're going pretty well. Yeah. So thank you so much for all that advice. But for those of you listening, I hope you got a ton of value from this episode. I will post Jason's information, his podcast, all his Twitter, Instagram, all that in the show notes below. So you can click on that. But thank you again, Jason. Make sure you go follow him on Instagram, Twitter, and go check out the On The Touchline podcast. All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.